Hello, welcome everyone. Today we are going to know about an accident which is not known to many people. More than anything, this event tells us how communication is the most essential part of aviation, and even a small gap in communicating basic information can lead to a huge catastrophe. Hang on till the end to know what exactly happened. The date was 10th of September 1976. It was a normal morning at London Heathrow Airport. It was busy as usual, with many flights lining up, waiting for their turn to take off and land at one of the busiest airports in the world. One of the flights lined up for takeoff was British Airways Flight 476. It was a Hawker Siddeley Trident, operating a route from London Heathrow to Istanbul Airport. It was carrying 54 passengers and 9 crew members, totaling 63 people on board. The flight took off from London at 8:32 am UTC. The flight took an air route known as UB5 to reach its destination. The flight was entirely uneventful until it reached Zagreb VOR. Before we proceed further, let's know a little about Zagreb VOR and the surrounding airspace. VOR, or short for Very High Frequency Omnidirectional Range, is a type of radio navigation system for an aircraft which helps it to determine its position and stay on course by receiving radio signals by a network of ground beacons. A mechanical VOR looks something like this. The pilot has to keep the needle centered and fly on course to the VOR station. Zagreb VOR was one of the most important reporting points for many airways. One such airway was UB5, which Flight 476 was using on that day. The airspace around Zagreb VOR was under the Zagreb Air Traffic Control Center. It was one of the busiest airspaces in the world at the time, yet it was severely understaffed. The airspace was divided into 3 separate sectors: the lower sector below 25,000 feet, the middle sector from 25,000 to 31,000 feet, and the upper sector about 31,000 feet. Flight 476 was flying at 33,000 feet, which meant that it had to contact the upper sector controller on reaching the concerned airspace. At 10:04 am and 19 seconds, Flight 476 contacted the upper sector controller for the first time, letting him know that they expected to reach Zagreb VOR at 10:14 am. This was the only communication between the crew and the ATC for the rest of the flight. The crew was only required to listen to the communication going on between other flights and the ATC for the rest of the duration. The time was 10:14 am and the flight was about to reach Zagreb VOR. Everything was routine and seemed to be under control until that time, but it was about to change in a few moments. At 10:14 am and 41 seconds, Flight 476 suddenly plummeted towards the ground. The aircraft seemed to be completely out of control as it seemed to be in a fatal dive. Flight 476 crashed into the ground tail first, killing all 63 people on board. However, this nightmare was about to get much worse. A Lufthansa Boeing 737, which was flying 15 nautical miles behind Flight 476 at flight level 290, reported something disturbing. He called the middle sector controller, informing him that he had seen 2 aircraft fall from the sky. The middle sector controller had a hard time understanding it, as the Lufthansa pilot was speaking in an agitated voice. When he finally realized what was being said, he looked over to the upper sector controller, who sat in his chair, completely shocked. The unthinkable had happened. 2 aircraft full of passengers had collided in one of the busiest airspaces in Europe. Inex Adria Aviopromet Flight 550 was a DC-9 which was operating a flight from Split to Cologne in Germany. The flight was carrying 108 passengers and 5 crew members. Flight 550 had taken off from Split at 9:48 am UTC. It was flying on airway B9 and contacted the middle sector controller at Zagreb while it was crossing 22,500 feet at 10:03 am. The reason why Flight 550 called the middle sector controller so early was because the lower sector controller had cleared the flight to flight level 260 as there was no conflicting traffic in between. After leveling out at 26,000 feet, Flight 550 contacted Zagreb ATC asking for a higher clearance. This was an issue because higher flight levels were already occupied by other flights. The only available altitude at that time was 35,000 feet, which was offered to the crew, which they gladly accepted. Now, the middle sector controller could not permit Flight 550 to go to flight level 350 directly. Since that altitude was under the upper sector area controller, he had to ask him first. The upper sector controller was very busy at that time. Another middle sector controller was asked to coordinate the climb out with the upper sector controller. He went to the controller with the flight progress strip and asked if Flight 550 could climb. He pointed to a blip on the upper sector controller's screen to show him that it was Flight 550. The upper sector controller asked him to wait for it to cross another aircraft, after which he approved the climb out. The approval was given to Flight 550. The middle sector controller gave Flight 550 the frequency for contacting the upper sector controller and asked him to squawk standby. Now, let us just wait for a moment and understand what was being said. There are two types of radar within an air traffic control system, primary radar and the secondary radar. The primary radar only shows the position of the aircraft but lacks other information such as altitude information. For this, the secondary radar comes into use. Each sector in the area control is allocated a clearly defined, numerically limited group of secondary radar codes which is used for easier identification of aircraft within a sector. Now, if the handover of Flight 550 had been done correctly, he would have been given a new squawk code and hence would have appeared on the upper sector controller's radar screen with all the flight information. Still, all was not gone. The crew of Flight 550 had the frequency to contact the upper sector controller and ask for the squawk code from the controller himself. This is where another communication breakdown occurred. The final communication between Flight 550 and the middle sector controller was at 10:12 am and 12 seconds, and the first contact with the upper sector controller was at 10:14 am and 4 seconds. This crucial gap of 1 minute and 52 seconds was very important. It was understood that the upper sector controller was very busy during this time, constantly talking with other airplanes and also with other ATCs about the planes entering in his control area. However, investigators analyzing the ATC tapes found 4 separate instances where there was a pause in the communication of the upper area controller and all other aircraft, where Flight 550 could have made itself known to him. Why this did not happen is not known conclusively. In the end, communication was finally established at 10:14 am and 4 seconds, as Flight 550 was crossing 32,500 feet. The upper sector controller realized the imminent danger and asked Flight 550 to stop climbing and maintain level altitude. It was too late by then. The flight leveled off at 33,000 feet, at the exact altitude at which Flight 476 was cruising. There was still a final breakdown remaining. The last communication between Flight 550 and the upper sector controller was done in Serbo-Croatian language instead of English. Hence, the flight crew of Flight 476 could not have understood what was being said between the two and hence were unaware of the imminent danger they were in. The last 5 meters of the DC-9's left wing cut through the cockpit section of the Trident and also took with it some part of the forward passenger cabin. Neither of the two aircrafts had any chance of recovery after the collision. The collision resulted in deaths of a total of 176 people on board both aircraft, making it the deadliest mid-air collision at the time. In the aftermath of the crash, all the controllers on duty were taken into custody. However, only the upper sector controller remained in custody until the trial for the crash was held. He was found guilty and was sentenced to 7 years of imprisonment. However, many air traffic controllers were of the view that he was made a scapegoat to hide the shortcomings of the air traffic system. The thing is, the controller should not have been alone at the time of his duty. The upper sector assistant controller was not present at his post in the build-up to the collision. The chief of the shift, too, did not take any action to intervene or help the upper sector controller. He was finally released on 29th of November 1978 after serving 2 years and 3 months in prison. My thoughts and prayers are with the people who passed away in this crash. I hope you liked the video. Do let me know in the comments what do you think of the breakdown in the communications that occurred in the build-up to the crash. As always, thank you for watching the video till the end.